Good morning, Bay Shore. You guys excited to be at church this morning? Hey, it's so good to see you guys today. If we haven't met before, my name is Cotter, and I'm the Next Steps pastor here at Bay Shore. And every Sunday, we got people that are joining us online through YouTube, through the Church Center app. So can we make some noise for everybody watching online today? Wherever you're watching at, we are just thankful to have you with us. Now, this week is an exciting one. Like Nate said, we are just a few days away from Serve Day this coming Saturday. And this is an event that I love. This will be the 4th year that we're doing it. And every year it's just been so special. We got a photo we can put up from last year on Serve Day. And so this photo is our Lewis Elementary School cleanup crew. And so we went out there, we were picking up trash, picking up sticks and logs and gum and all kinds of craziness that was on their playground. And it was just an absolute blast. And over at Lewis Elementary, they got a beautiful playground. And all I wanted to do all morning was slide down the playground. That's really all I wanted to do, but we didn't. We stuck to the task. I didn't have eyes on Kobe all morning, so I don't know for sure that Kobe wasn't going down the slide, but for the most part, we were focused on cleaning that place up. And one of the coolest things about Serve Day is you get to hang out with people that you don't usually get to hang out with at the church. And so a lot of this group, we just got to hang out and serve together, and a few of them are in a small group that Nick and Kira lead, and so it was just really cool to be with friends and be serving together. And so if you're signed up for Serve Day this coming Saturday, get psyched up. It is going to be a lot of fun. It is one of the best Saturdays of the whole year. Now, speaking of getting psyched, I'm excited for the verses that we are going to read this morning. So we're going to hop right on in. This is Matthew chapter 7. If you don't have a Bible, we've got Bibles out in the lobby. We'd love to give you if you need one, if a friend needs one. So be sure to grab that when you're grabbing some coffee. But we're also going to have everything on the screens this morning as well. So let's check this out. Matthew 7, beginning with verse 24. It says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." So Jesus had been teaching this group of people for a long time. He started out this teaching in Matthew chapter 5, continued all the way through Matthew 6, and here to the end of chapter 7. And at the beginning of this section, the Bible tells us that the crowds were following Jesus. So we went up on this mountainside to teach them, and he shared with them about how to live, how to pray, the importance of giving to the needy. He taught many things to this group of people. And the verses that we just read are where Jesus is wrapping up these teachings and giving them some final instructions. So he shares this story about two guys who built their houses in two very distinct ways, the wise man and the foolish man. So the wise man, he built his house on the rock, and when the storms came, when the water rose, the wind blew, his house was safe because it was secured on a good foundation. But the foolish man built his house on the sand. It was a weak foundation. When the storms came and the wind blew and the water rose, his house was destroyed. So the house built on the good foundation survived the storm, but the house built on the weak foundation was destroyed when the winds came. Now, how many of you guys built sandcastles at the beach when you were a kid? Man, that was the best. And now being a parent, I am the one with the shovel in my hand the whole time we're at the beach, just digging the holes for the kids. But growing up here in Delaware, you don't really get waves in the summer. So you got to find other ways to entertain yourself at the beach. And so my brother and my cousins and I, digging holes was one of our favorite things to do. And my cousin Sarah is super creative. And so we would dig these holes, and she would shape all kinds of crazy things. She would shape couches into the sand, TVs into the sand. One time, she made an N64 in the sand. I mean, Nintendo 64 is what's up. It was awesome. And so I couldn't find a photo of that hole. That was the best one we ever did. But I do have a photo of the four of us after one of our holes got totally destroyed that we can put up on the screen. And so this is us hanging out at the beach. Good times. Listen, this is the 90s. This is literally what pictures looked like in the 90s, if you don't remember. And I'm the super goofy looking one with giant ears over here on the side. That's me. So we would spend so many hours just digging these holes and having a blast. But no matter how much time we put into it, at the end of the day, the ocean would always come up and just totally wipe out everything that we had built. And that's what happened to one of these houses here in the story that Jesus is telling. And so he talks about these two men who built their houses on totally different foundations, one on the rock and another one on the sand. And Jesus was using this story to communicate the importance of having a good foundation in life. Something that'll keep us stable, something that will anchor us when we face challenges. And Jesus says the way to have a solid foundation is to hear his words and also to put them into practice. So everyone in that crowd, they had heard his teachings, but hearing God's word alone doesn't change our lives. We have to do something with it. We have to allow his teachings to change how we're living. So in this sermon in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, here's some of the things that Jesus had taught to this crowd. He said, don't seek revenge, remove temptations from your life, pray for your enemies, give to the needy, don't worry, prioritize prayer, be merciful and pure, be a peacemaker. And so Jesus' point about building our house on the rock is not that we simply agree with his teachings. Agreeing is part of it, but the Bible needs to shape how we live. The Bible needs to shape how we live. I think we'd all agree that Jesus' teachings are good. Showing mercy is good. Giving to the needy is good. Prioritizing prayer is good. But knowing those things are good and actually living it out is very different. If you think about exercising and eating healthy, we all know those things are good for us. We'll have more energy, we'll live longer, we'll feel stronger, blah, blah, blah. But are we actually doing it? You know what I mean? Like knowing those things and actually eating better and not just sitting on the couch all the time, like those are different things. Knowledge is one step of it, but what defines wisdom is acting on that knowledge. Let's put verse 24 back on the screen. Jesus says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man. The Bible isn't just a book that we read for knowledge. It's a guide to how we live. And as we read, we change how we live based on what we read in the Bible. Our priorities change, our habits change, our responses change. And so we build a solid foundation for our lives by hearing God's words and also allowing them to shape how we're living. And that foundation is important because in this parable that Jesus shared, the wise man and the foolish man, they had to rely on their foundations when the storms came. Both men faced storms, both foundations were tested, but only one was secure. And look, there's many things in this life that sell us a promise of security and safety. Retirement plans, houses, new diets and medications, all kinds of stuff. But there's only one foundation capable of keeping us eternally secure, and that is a life built on Jesus. He's the only secure foundation. And when we rely on him, we can hold on to his promises during life's storms. When Jesus is our foundation, our response is to look to the Bible and remember all the amazing things that we learn in the Bible. We remember that God will take care of us, that God is stronger than our enemies, that he's greater than our obstacles, that nothing is impossible for him. We build that foundation when we live out our faith, and it's a foundation that'll last. But we also see in this parable that our foundation will be tested. And that's not just something we experience. Even those who were closest to Jesus dealt with this as well. And so we'll move from chapter 7 in Matthew into chapter 8. And as chapter 7 ended, Jesus comes down from the mountainside where he was teaching the people. And when he got to the bottom, he continued to teach. He continued to heal. And the crowds continued to follow him. And so Jesus and his disciples, they got on a boat to cross to the other side of the lake. And that's where we'll pick up the story, Matthew 8, starting in verse 23. It says, then he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him saying, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. So Jesus and his disciples, they're on this boat. He goes to take a nap, and while he's sleeping, this huge storm comes up. The storm is intense. There's water coming onto the boat, and the disciples were scared. So they wake Jesus up. They start pleading with him to save them from the storm. They were convinced that they were going to sink. And these are guys that have seen all of Jesus' teachings and miracles firsthand. They were right there listening to everything Jesus said to the crowds on the mountainside. And when Jesus came down from the mountain and was healing the sick and performing miracles, they were there for it all. But here, when the storm came up, they were terrified. They were convinced that they were going to drown. They thought it was all over. And I think there's so much that we can learn from them in this situation. The first thing that we see is a positive lesson. The first thing we can learn from the disciples is that Jesus was their foundation. He was their foundation. Let's put verse 25 back up on the screen. It says, the disciples went and woke him saying, "Lord, save us." So when they thought they were going to die, they went to Jesus. They pleaded with him to save them. When they needed something to hold on to in life, Jesus was their answer. And so here's our first takeaway. We'll put this on the screen. Jesus needs to be our foundation. Jesus needs to be our foundation. The disciples had the knowledge of who Jesus was. They'd heard his teachings. They'd experienced his miracles. But the important thing is, they truly believed that he was the Son of God. When they got scared, they turned to Jesus. And for us, there's great value in seeing the disciples' response here, because we're going to face difficulties in life. We're going to get overwhelmed by our circumstances. We're going to get scared. We're going to get fearful. And when that happens, we're going to turn to something to try to get through those moments. And what we turn to should be Jesus. We know that. We're here in church this morning. We're singing and reading about God's greatness and his power. But just because we're in church, just because we have knowledge about who God is, doesn't mean we're definitely going to choose to follow him in those hard moments. It's still a choice that we have to make. There's a verse from the hymn that we sang earlier, "Come Thy Fount," that speaks to this. And I'm thankful the band sang that this morning. We'll put this up on the screen. It says, "Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love." This is a hymn that was written in the year 1758 by a British pastor. And over 260 years later, these words are so true for us as well. We are prone to wander away from God. We are naturally inclined to stray from God's ways, to choose our own path, especially when we face challenges. And the messaging that the world is putting in front of us is constantly reinforcing that inclination for us to walk away from God when life gets hard. Watch some commercials on TV, some ads on YouTube or Hulu or Spotify. What is getting pushed to us? Alcohol and gambling and partying and spending money, all kinds of things that we can use to try to cope with our pain, ways that we can try to distract ourselves. So the messaging we're getting from the world says, look, when life gets hard, you can rely on these things to get through it, to numb the pain, to take your mind off of it. But think about what we read in Matthew 7. Those things are a foundation of sand. They're hollow. They are empty. They won't solve our problems. They're just going to create more headaches for us. We need a solid foundation for our lives, one that we can trust in, one that we can depend on, one that won't fail, one that is eternal, something more than just a temporary distraction. Jesus needs to be our foundation, and we need to choose that. The wise man built his house and his foundation on the teachings of Jesus. That's the rock that he built on. So when the storms came, he could withstand it because he chose to rely on God to take care of him. The foolish man didn't rely on God in his storms. He had heard Jesus' teachings. He didn't believe them, though. And he didn't really trust in God to take care of him. He relied on himself. He relied on his own strength and his own wisdom and the things of the world. He thought they would keep him strong, but they couldn't. We can navigate the storms of life only when Jesus is our foundation. So we need the Bible to be our foundation. God's teachings, his promises, that's what we rely on. So when life gets challenging, we will have read the Bible and we'll already know that we can trust in God. We'll know that he's trustworthy and that he'll deliver for us. The disciples faced this great storm out on the water, but when they did, they knew where to turn because Jesus was their foundation. Let's keep reading. The disciples are on this boat. The storm comes up. They turn to Jesus, and now let's look at his response. So Matthew 28 is the second half of this verse. He says, "Then he got up, rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. So they turned to Jesus, and he delivered for them." And here's the lesson I want us to see. God is able. God is able. When we make Jesus our foundation, he can deliver for us. Our God can calm the wind and the waves with his voice. Our God makes the impossible possible. He is able to do all things. Now, a few weeks ago in that big snowstorm that we got, my wife and I, we were trying to get outside with the kids like all the time, as much as we could. And that was a snowstorm for the ages. There's like a million practical things to do in that snowstorm, trying to make sure your pipes didn't freeze, trying to clean up the 10,000 branches that fell off the trees, like all kinds of stuff. But how many of you guys like got outside and enjoyed the snow? Anybody? Like 6 people? Awesome. Listen, in Delaware, we don't get storms like that. So we were just trying to embrace it and enjoy as much as we could of it. And so if we were not eating or sleeping, we were trying to be outside with the kids playing in the snow. And we were doing all kinds of things. We were walking in the fields. The kids were playing with their toys outside. And one night after dinner, it was almost completely dark outside. But we got all 4 of us on a sled and we're riding down the hill together. We were riding my wife's snowboard down the hill, like just having a blast. And one day, one of the things the kids wanted to do was they wanted to play baseball in the snow. I don't know why. I don't know why you play baseball to begin with. But in the snow, I did not understand. And so we did it for them, though. We'll do anything for the kids. And so we got a photo of the kids throwing the baseball to each other in their goofy snow clothes. So you got Cliff Lee throwing the ball right here. You got Mark McGuire at the plate. Like it was awesome. And our son that's throwing the ball in this picture, like it never actually got to his brother. I had to throw it to get to him. But we were playing and our son was actually doing pretty good. Like he was hitting the ball pretty well. And because he was doing well, he started to kind of negotiate some incentives with me. And so he was like, okay, Dad, listen, if I hit the ball over the neighbor's yard and into the field behind their yard, can I get a piece of chocolate? Now listen, that field is like 200 yards from where we were at the time. So I was like, yeah, man, absolutely you can do that if you hit the ball that far, because it's not going to happen. So easy deal to agree with. And so we threw the ball, we kept playing, and then he kind of realized that wasn't going to happen. And so he reset expectations. He started negotiating again. He said, okay, if I just hit the ball over the neighbor's house, then can I get some chocolate? And I'm not sure if it's clear in this photo. He's the one wearing the green jacket, but he's 4 years old, and he's wearing a jacket where he can barely move his arms. So hitting the ball over the neighbor's house that's 100 yards away from where we were, that's not going to happen either. And so after a few good hits and him walking forward 5 feet after every time he swung the ball, he also realized he couldn't do it. And so he asked me, he was like, Dad, can you hit the ball over the neighbor's house? And listen, I know my arms are huge. Like just massive. I'm built like a professional baseball player. All the time, people are like, is that Bryce Harper? No, that's never happened. But listen, there's no chance of me hitting the ball over the neighbor's house. Maybe if you give me one of those Sammy Sosa cork bats, then maybe 50 miles an hour wind behind me, probably still not going to happen. There's a lot of limits to what I can do. A lot of limits to what I'm capable of doing. And here's my point in saying that. When we think about God, we tend to put him in the boxes that we have for ourselves. So we have limitations in every area of life, our health, our understanding, what we're capable of. I could go on forever. We all have clear limitations in life, and we tend to project those limitations onto God. So we're going through something hard. We say, I can't understand my situation, so there's no way God would understand this. Or I don't have the ability to overcome this, so God's not capable of helping me. And listen, all of that is foolishness. Because our God does not have any limits. He doesn't have any limits. We just read 2 chapters here in Matthew, and we didn't read all these verses, but here's some of the stuff that happened in Matthew 7 and 8. Jesus healed a man that had leprosy. He healed the centurion's servant without even being in the same location. I don't know what the theological word is for long-range healing, but Jesus has that ability, and he did it. Then he healed many others. Then we see him calm the winds and the waves with his voice. Our God is able to do all things. He can calm the winds and the waves with his voice. Our God does what seems impossible. He's worthy of being our foundation. He does not have limitations. Let's look at a couple of verses together. This first one is from Romans 10. It's verse 11. It says, the scripture says, anyone who believes in him will never be put to shame. When we believe in Jesus, we will never be put to shame. He will not let us down. This next verse is from Matthew 19, verse 26. It says, Jesus looked at them and said, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. With God, all things are possible. There's no challenge too great for him. There's no trial he can't overcome. There's no situation that we face that he cannot conquer. No problem he cannot solve. There's nothing impossible for him. And I want to pause for a moment because I know that some of you are going through some really heavy things right now. Some situations that feel impossible. Some stress that feels like it is just weighing you down. And listen, when we are going through really, really hard times and we feel hopeless and things feel really, really challenging and difficult and we are exhausted, it's important to remember that we can rely on God. We can always rely on God. We worship the only true God, and he's a God that will overcome all things. He's a God that carries us when we don't have the strength, a God that does not get tired, does not grow weary, does not ever fail. No matter how impossible things are for us, nothing's impossible for our God. We can rely on him in every situation. Look at this next verse with me. Psalm 18, verse 30. It says, God's way is perfect. All the Lord's promises prove true. He's a shield for all who look to him for protection. God is perfect. His promises are true. He is our shield. God is able. The disciples relied on him to be their foundation when they were distressed, and he's worthy of being our foundation as well. We've seen some positive things from the disciples in their response, but this next lesson is a learning moment for the disciples. So we'll put up verses 25 and 26 again. It says, the disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. He replied, you have little faith. Why are you so afraid? And he got up, rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. When that storm came, the disciples didn't have full trust in Jesus. And look, when I first read this, my first thought was like, it's a good thing they turned to him. That's really good, right? And it was. But where they failed was their level of trust. It's great that they turned to Jesus, but if we look at how they approached him, we can see they were frantic and they were panicked. They wanted to be saved. They knew to turn to Jesus, but they weren't really sure if he could save them. They said to him, we are going to drown. They were convinced that they were going to drown. And if they fully trusted in God to keep them safe, they wouldn't be saying that. They got scared. And they panicked, and they let their situation overwhelm them. Their faith was weak. Jesus in verse 26 refers to their faith as little or small. And that's their failure, that lack of faith. And to help me understand this section more, I was reading Charles Spurgeon's commentary on the book of Matthew. And Charles Spurgeon is one of the great theologians in history. And what we're going to read, he wrote in the 1890s, over 130 years ago. So the way he writes is a little old school. And so a little difficult to understand at first glance, but we'll put it on the screen and we'll kind of work through it together. He said, why little faith in a great God? It is well that it is faith, it is ill that it is little. Why little faith in a great God? It is well that it is faith, it is ill that it is little. He's saying it is good that the disciples had faith, but why was their faith so small when God is so big? Why do they have little faith in a great God? And here's what I hope we can learn from this. The disciples, they should have had great faith. They had heard Jesus preach. They were right there. They saw him heal. They lived alongside of him. But in their hearts, they didn't believe that he truly was greater than all things, more powerful than all things, and the ultimate one in control. They had the evidence right in front of them, but their trust was weak. And I believe this example is here included in the book of Matthew so that we don't make that same mistake. We have the evidence of who God is right in front of us in every page of the Bible. We have evidence of God's greatness every time we wake up in the morning, every time we take a breath, see a sunrise, see the ocean, every time we experience God's creation. And if we look back at our lives, I think there's so many moments that we can identify where we see God's love, where we see his grace for us and his compassion and his mercy. God makes himself so clear to us. We have to decide if we're going to trust him. Why little faith in a great God? Listen, let's make sure our faith is not little. Let's make sure our faith is not weak. Let's make sure that our trust in God matches the level that his greatness deserves. That's how we make Jesus our foundation. We have great faith in a great God. Great faith in a great God. Look at this next verse with me from Psalm 34. It says, the righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. Living for Jesus, it doesn't mean we won't have troubles, but it does mean that God will take care of us. It does mean that God will take care of us. The Bible says that God never changes. He is steadfast. He's mighty. He's bigger than our battles. He's greater than anything we face. And when God is our foundation, we can trust in him to get through anything. God is on our side, and he promises to take care of us. And having great faith reminds us of that. We need to build up our faith now so that as challenges come, we're prepared. Let's place our first verse from this morning, Matthew 7:24, back on the screen. And Jesus here is explaining what we need to do to be wise and what we need to do to have a solid foundation. So let's check this out. He says two things. He says, therefore, everyone who, one, hears these words of mine, and two, puts them into practice. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. So we build our foundation, we build a strong faith by hearing Jesus' words and by putting them into practice. And hearing Jesus' words starts with reading the Bible. When we are facing obstacles, it's so important for us to be able to remember what we've read in the Bible, to remember the times in the Bible when God's provided for his people. To remember all of God's promises to us that he writes about in the Bible. To remember what the Bible says about his character and his greatness and his love for us. Being able to recall God's words is an anchor for us in our faith. It builds resilience. It helps us to be steadfast. And how you go about reading the Bible, what your rhythm is for that, I think that's something that's important to figure out. I know in my life that's changed at different times. When I was in high school, I would read at night, and I tried to do the Bible in a year. When I got to college, I was a communications major, so I had all kinds of time on my hands. And so I was reading the Bible for hours a day. Me and my friends were memorizing books of the New Testament, and it was awesome. But I didn't have a job or responsibilities, really, because I was a communications major, and I didn't have kids. And so I had a whole lot more energy. And so now what my rhythm looks like is totally different than what it was in college or in high school. And now I do a mix of reading my physical Bible, reading the Bible app on my phone, and listening to the Bible. That's what's been working for me. And this year I've been listening a lot through the YouVersion Bible app. I love that app. It's free. That's part one of it being good. And it's got a lot of amazing translations in there. And man, I love listening to the Bible through the Bible app. When I'm walking around the house or I am driving in the car or doing the dishes, I just love turning on the Bible, and you can listen to a book of the Bible in just a few minutes. And so some days I am listening to books of the Bible and I'm getting through a book or two. Some days I am just sitting down with my physical Bible and I'm reading a verse, 2 verses, or 6 verses. However you read, the important thing is making it practical and making it repeatable, so that reading the Bible becomes a habit and a pillar of your life. Here's the last thing, final lesson from Matthew 7:24. We build our foundation by putting Jesus' teachings into practice. It's not enough just to know what Jesus says. We need to live it. It's not enough just to know what Jesus says. We need to live it. We need to hear Jesus' words. We need to believe that they are true, and they need to change how we live. They need to define how we live. It needs to be everything to us. That's what it means to have Jesus as our foundation. It needs to be everything that our lives are built upon. Each day we're all facing storms, and the only way that we can get through those storms is by building our lives on the foundation of Jesus, by relying in him, trusting in him to provide for us.